Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome to our loyal audience and a special welcome to our guests tonight, and an extra special welcome to our C-SPAN audience. Tonight is the 122nd program in our weekly America at a Crossroads Town Hall series. We could not have timed tonight's program better. How lucky are we to be welcoming Neal Katyal and Leonnig as our guests, and of course also our moderator, the wonderful Patt Morrison. Thanks to all three of you for joining us tonight to cover a wide array of very current events. America at a Crossroads is a joint venture between Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc. Thanks, as always, to our leadership team, which is led by David Lehrer and me, former Congressman Mel Levine, Zev Yaroslavsky, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and Caroline Kelly. Next week, we address a topic also of critical importance to our country, the impact of the Dobbs decision, which overruled Roe versus Wade. Our guest will be the very dynamic former president of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards. Cecile will help us understand how the overturning of Roe v. Wade impacts not only the lives and health of America's women, but how it seems to be impacting the midterm elections. Patt Morrison will be our moderator for that conversation. And the following week, we welcome another of America's great constitutional scholars, Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School. He will be in conversation with media law expert Henry Weinstein of UC Irvine School of Law. I sound like a broken record, and maybe I am preaching to the mostly converted, but if you unsubscribe from our emails, you will not get your links, or either to register or to Zoom in. So that's really important. Don't advertently or inadvertently unsubscribe. And also, when you're registering for programs, if you uncheck the box which says you want to hear from the program organizers, you won't get the links either. So leave the boxes alone. And if you want to get our links, if you don't want to get our links, then you can check whatever boxes or uncheck whatever boxes you'd like. I want to thank you all for your donations, large and small. They enable these magnificent programs. Now I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, David Lehrer, for a little bit more information on what's coming up for us.
Thank you, Janice. I think it's worth noting that our audience tonight, am I muted? No. Exceeds 4,000 registrants, the largest viewership since David Brooks in early July. The weather may be alluring, the sun may be shining, but you, the America at a Crossroads audience, remains loyal and interested, and we are grateful for that. In addition to the programs that Janice just outlined, on September 28th, we host New York University professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a leading scholar on autocracies and their leaders. She'll discuss her recent book, Strong Men, How They Rise, How They Succeed, and How They Fall. And she'll be in conversation with Stanford University professor and a frequent guest and host on America at Crossroads, Larry Diamond, himself a leading expert in democracy studies. October will bring us the New York Times chief White House correspondent, Peter Baker, with his wife, Susan Glasser, the New Yorker's White House maven. They will be revealing fascinating items from their soon-to-be published book, The Divider, Trump in the White House, 2017-2021. Now to introduce tonight's panel, a moderator, a founding member of the Jews United Executive Committee, former Congressman Mel Levine. Mel has been an essential part of the America at Crossroads team, helping us craft our programs and securing countless guests. It's a pleasure. Mel?
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure being with you guys once again. And I am thrilled, and we're all thrilled to have such a all-star lineup tonight. First, Neal Katyal. Neal is former acting Solicitor General of the United States. He's a partner at Hogan Lovells Law Firm and a professor of national security law at Georgetown University Law Center. Previously, he served as Principal Deputy Solicitor General in the U.S. Justice Department. He's a legal analyst, frequently seen on MSNBC, and he has been widely praised as one of America's leading attorneys. His insights pertaining to the FBI's investigation of Donald Trump, as well as the range of other legal issues pertaining to Donald Trump, have been a beacon of clarity in the midst of a sea of misinformation. Leonnig is a multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning national investigative reporter with the Washington Post and is focused on the White House and government accountability. She recently authored a very important book, subtitled The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. The book is entitled Zero Fail. It's highly acclaimed and of great importance in light of a variety of Secret Service issues, some of which have become highly visible recently. She also co-authored 2 recent bestsellers, I Alone Can Fix It and A Very Stable Genius, both of whom are also highly acclaimed. The insights she regularly provide needed clarity on many of the most relevant issues involving January 6th and related issues. And we have our wonderful moderator, Patt Morrison, once again. She's an LA Times winner of tons of journalism and broadcasting awards, including the most prestigious ones around. I will not name them all, but I'll turn this over to Pat to do her masterful interviewing of Neal and Carol.
Mel, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here this evening. The month before Labor Day used to be considered a slow news month. That's not the case anymore, but maybe not since the Watergate summer of 1974, where we've seen so much news being made and so much of it about and by Donald Trump. Now, the news cycle's been faster and faster, and we're trying to get to as many of those stories as we can. We also want to get to your questions as we can this evening. So if you'll put your questions in the Q&A box, the opportunity you see at the bottom of the screen, we'll get to as many questions as we can after we talk to our guests about what they have been finding out. And of course, we begin with the most recent story as reported by Carol and her colleague Devlin Barrett, that investigators found highly classified nuclear documents in their search of Mar-a-Lago. So Carol, exactly what was it they found?
Pat, first of all, thank you for being here. And it's always a pleasure to sit with anybody from American Crossroads and their organization, but also especially Neal Katyal, somebody I've been covering for a long time. And now I find myself on the screen with him more than with a microphone in his face. I am happy to be here and happy to answer your questions. And with regard to the documents seized at Mar-a-Lago in August, I can say this: we were sort of on the hunt to understand what were the most worrisome or the most sensitive documents that were gained and gathered by the FBI when they did go down to Mar-a-Lago unfettered and search through former President Donald Trump's part-time residence and basically beach club. We found that 2 buckets of information, and this does not mean that we have figured out everything, but 2 buckets of information were extraordinarily sensitive. The first were records that revolved around the nuclear capacity, the nuclear capabilities of a foreign government. The details of that are very serious for any country, an ally or an adversary, because of 2 reasons. One, if it's an adversary, we don't want them to know that the US really has peeled back the curtain and been able to figure out whether or not they have, uranium, whether or not they have a certain nuclear program capacity, whether or not they're on the path to having a full-throated program. And if it's an ally, we don't want them to realize that we are keenly spying on them as well, because that can really hurt relationships and could cause grave harm to national security. The second bucket of information was sort of a stunner to me as well, and it's harder to explain because it's so shocking. And that was that many of the records that the FBI came upon involved special access programs that are so closely guarded, with so few people authorized to inspect them, that some of the most senior national security officials in the current government did not have authority to look at these documents, did not have authorization to know that these special access programs existed. You can bet everything you have that there's no one at Mar-a-Lago for the last 18 months who had the clearances to handle or store or review these kinds of records.
The May 11th subpoena lists a category of classified nuclear weapons information, among them the types of documents the government was seeking. How did the government know or suspect they might be there? Were there empty files, empty spots in logs somewhere where these documents should have been?
I wish I could answer this with absolute firm precision, but what I think I should say, in the interest of being safe and also transparent about what we don't know, is that we have sources who have told us that when the government subpoenaed this information in May, I believe the date is May 11th, when this material was subpoenaed, all classifications they could imagine, everything they could list, was included in that subpoena. So everything from top secret to confidential, and then 24 other subclassifications to include that funny acronym that nobody really seems to know how to read, but involves nuclear weapon details under something called S/FRD, formerly restricted distribution. It covers a universe of materials governed by the Atomic Energy Act. But we are told that the government was not sure exactly what they would find, but they had been told through witnesses and other materials, but especially through witnesses, that there was a very high degree of certainty that classified material still remained at Mar-a-Lago on the premises, despite former President Trump's lawyers asserting and swearing that after a diligent search, there were no more classified records on the property.
We know Neal Katyal from his past behavior that Donald Trump has spilled the beans on secrets that should have remained secret, and because of him were not. The speculation is now as to which countries' nuclear capabilities were disclosed in these documents that were carried out of the White House by someone in the Trump administration, if not Trump himself. Do you hear anything knowledgeable, informed about which country may have been involved?
So first of all, I just want to thank you all for having us again. Carol and I did this before a few months ago, and it was so much fun. So
Back by popular demand.
We're also back because of our demand, because we had so much fun doing this. Before I was Solicitor General, I was National Security Advisor at the Justice Department, where I did get to handle some of these very documents like covert operations and stuff like that. And the truth is, they're sometimes so secret, like even the Deputy Attorney General, the number 2 person, wasn't read in and wasn't allowed to have documents like this. So what Carol's referring to is like the essence of security classification. It's both, do you trust the individual, have they passed the requisite background check? But it's also, do they have a need to know? Because as we know with any kind of sensitive information, the wider the circle it is, the more there's an opportunity to leak or have a mistake happen or something like that. If I had to guess, but this is a guess based on both where our own intelligence kind of generally thinks about, but also, what Donald Trump seems to have cared about, Iran would probably be at the top of the list. And I have to say, it is astounding to me, the idea that any of this information left the White House anywhere, let alone, some, country club with pools and wedding facilities and stuff. Now, I guess it evidently offers nuclear secrets as well as one of its amenities. I can't imagine it. And, every time Carol breaks a story about these documents, I think it can't get possibly worse for Trump. And yet somehow every week there's another story that she reports with even more concerning details about Donald Trump's reckless disregard for our nation's security. And let me just give you 2 concrete things to think about when you hear about these documents. We've seen the photo with all these classified information, that was held at Mar-a-Lago. But what does that mean in practice? Well, imagine that you're a spy in the field. Maybe you're working for the Russian government or some other government. That's your job on a daily basis, but you've turned against them and you're secretly providing information to us, human source intelligence. Or suppose that there's an electronic capability to break into people's iPhones that, hasn't been disclosed. A document like that, if found in the wrong hands, you could reverse engineer that. And even if that hasn't happened, if you're that spy in the field, you got to worry it's happened. And so future spies, let alone the ones who've currently, benefited the United States by providing intelligence. Future ones have to worry, hey, if I give you this information, am I going to be killed? Is this going to go get shipped to Mar-a-Lago? And that's particularly true when you think about the second scenario, which is foreign intelligence sharing. It's no secret that we share our intelligence with foreign governments and them with us, not all of it, but some very sensitive information. And you had referred earlier in your question to Donald Trump's penchant for kind of sharing this stuff. There was a very highly publicized incident in the Oval Office early in his time when he revealed really sensitive information that, dried up a source of intelligence and maybe got someone killed. That's one thing doing in the Oval Office when you are the president. I mean, it's crazy, maybe an impeachable offense, but it's not a crime. To abscond with those documents afterwards, obvious, simple crime. And if you're one of those countries that shared intel with us, sensitive intel, you have to worry, can we do that again? Or is, some future president going to walk off with this material? That's why I think actually Merrick Garland has no choice. I think he actually has to indict. I don't think that there's a scenario in which he can look the other way. It'd be one thing if it were like minor documents about, some, titillous detail that wasn't revealed with, hard sources and methods or something like that.
Or
But
Kim Jong-un letters.
yeah, but where a copy of Roger Stone's pardon, reliving his glory days, whatever, that's fine. I mean, it's still a problem, but it's not criminal in the same way. But what this is, it's criminal every day of the week. If I did what he did, if I did even 1/1000th of what he did, you wouldn't be talking to me right now because I'd be in jail and there'd be no cameras there.
Carol, given the gravity of these documents, do you have any idea where they were found in Mar-a-Lago? Were they in a desk drawer? Were they in a closet? Clearly, they shouldn't have left even controlled circumstances in the White House, one of the most controlled places in the country. But in Mar-a-Lago, where did they turn up?
So there were three primary places, but we don't know that those are exclusively the locations, Patty, where this was discovered. So the three were a storage, there's huge storage sort of shed almost that was built into the foundation of Mar-a-Lago after, Marjorie Merriweather Post had long since vacated the premises, and Donald Trump realized he was going to need more storage facility for a club rather than a home. And, this contains everything from vodka bottles to flour to cleaning equipment, etc. It's enormous. But in a far right-hand corner, there's a smaller sub-closet, which is an area that some of these records were kept. And we're told that, the access to this was limited. Of course, keep in mind, it's, as Neal well put it, a club where there are, people going to the pool and valets pulling out beach towels and weddings and special events and a lot of household and cleaning staff passing through. There's also the residence, and there's also the office of Donald Trump at the club. These are all places. I would like to say that this is a good opportunity to remind people something that Neal knows very well, and that I have experienced only as a visitor to the Department of Justice and the National Security Division, SCIF. I wasn't allowed in. I was allowed into a vestibule of it, but I know what I had to do to even get into that little antechamber. These documents, top secret documents, and those that are secure compartmented information, another level of top secret, a degree of top secret, I guess I should say, are normally kept under lock and key, under specifically prescribed SCIFs, secure compartmented information facilities. They have top secret control officers that are designated for certain programs and certain sub-agencies that are in charge of monitoring when those documents leave their secure facility, for what purpose they are departing, and almost like O'Hare, when are they coming back in, and why haven't they come back in yet? They are responsible for tracking these documents, and one of the enduring mysteries is how in the world did even a president leaving on January 20th depart with hundreds upon hundreds of pages of documents for which there should be a blinking red light in a number of storage facilities around the government.
that we trust will be answered by some of your reporting in the future. Neal, one of the biggest stories, at least we thought was going to be the big story this week, was a federal judge, Judge Cannon, agreeing that a special master needed to be appointed to handle the documents that the FBI took during its search of Mar-a-Lago. This has occasioned a lot of criticism across both sides, across the political spectrum, as to the quality of the legal reasoning here and as to the consequences that this could wreak on the investigation being conducted, whether it's been brought to a screeching halt, who a special master could be who is now qualified to look at documents that even cabinet officials may not be allowed to look at, and just exactly where this leaves matters. Neal, you're on mute.
Sorry,
There we
there's
go.
not a lot of criticism about the quality of the judge's order here, because there literally was no quality. It was an atrocious ruling start to finish. So you don't even get to the word beginning with a Q, because quite honestly, you know, any of my first year law students would have written a better opinion than this. Every part of the decision is problematic. And you know this because, you know, this judge has lost even Bill Barr. Bill Barr has said that the request for a special master is a crock of use the S word, and attacked the ruling and said the Justice Department should appeal. So just to break down the ruling for everyone, it has two basic components. One is she appoints a special master, which is someone who oversees and looks through documents to make sure nothing is privileged, kind of an adjunct, a law clerk of sorts to the federal judge, to make sure that the government won't look at anything that is privileged here by attorney-client privilege or by executive privilege. So that's one part of the ruling. The other part of the ruling is to say, until the special master completes her review, injunction on using these documents in the criminal investigation generally has to stop. So I can see some arguments for a special master, some pragmatic ones. I think they're bad here, and I'll explain that in a minute. But nobody can justify the idea that you can stop, as a federal judge, a criminal investigation in its tracks. And particularly because of a few documents, because, you know, she says there are 11,000 documents in total, but Trump isn't claiming privilege over 11,000 documents. He's claiming executive privilege over some, which is a bogus claim I'll talk about in a minute, and attorney-client privilege over some. That doesn't mean you stop the entire investigation. That's like using a bazooka when you need at most a scalpel. And it's a huge separation of powers problem, which is why I think the Justice Department just has to appeal, because it's a crazy ruling that would interfere with prosecutions more generally. Now, with the appointment of the special master, what she says is, well, there's so much reputational stigma to this search that Donald Trump has undergone, so therefore I'm going to appoint a special master. Well, you know, every defendant would love to have a special master. I mean, every defendant says they're facing stigma and reputational harm. Every defendant says that they are, you know, unfairly targeted and their reputation is going to be sullied. You never get a special master for these reasons. And you especially don't get one when you're a judge who've basically been forum shopped to, because there was a judge who authorized the search, a magistrate judge, Reinhardt, and Trump just bypassed that person altogether and just filed an action before Judge Cannon, whom he repeatedly has filed before in past cases to try and forum shop for her, and has been criticized by other federal judges for it. But nonetheless, you know, she went ahead and did that. And there are so many problems with this. The most obvious is a practical one. The government's already looked at this information. So it's like normally when you have a special master, it's like when Michael Cohen's attorney offices were seized, he sought a special master right away because he said, stop, government shouldn't be able to look through attorney-client documents. Here, Trump sat on his hands for a few weeks, filed it after they've looked through all this. So that's one problem. Another problem is she hasn't ever explained what could possibly be privileged, what could have executive privilege. She said President Biden hasn't waived executive privilege, but if she read the government's brief, there's a whole letter saying that he does. So she obviously didn't read it or understand it. Even if you thought that wasn't determinative, she should then give some guidance to the special master about what's underprivileged and what isn't. She hasn't. So basically, this is all a long way of trying to delay justice for Donald Trump by months, if not years. So I think the department has a variety of options available to it in terms of an appeal or a motion for reconsideration. And I suspect we'll see a pretty aggressive filing soon. I just want to say one other thing about Carol's point about how this information is all under lock and key and it gets signed in and out. And that's absolutely right. Like I used to go into those special skiffs and I was terrified I was going to remove a pencil at the end of it. I mean, you know, you're so terrified that you'll walk out by mistake with something and they have people there to check. So it's a really interesting thing. What happened to those people? But also, is that going to be Donald Trump's defense, which is they basically let me have all these documents. They let me walk out of the room with all of them. So now I'm authorized. And most that would get him to, you know, you can bring it to, you know, your bedroom from the Oval Office. It's never going to get him to, you can bring it to Mar-a-Lago, you know, thousands of miles away with no secure facility to maintain that material. And one of the most important things about classification, as I was saying before, is this concept of need to know. Even if you have all the background checks, even if you're the president or whatever, you got to have a need to know. And if you're the former president, by definition, you don't have a need to know, and you certainly don't have a need to bring these documents with you wherever you're going. So this is actually an easy criminal case at the end of the day, and I suspect it will be brought.
Carol, I hate to use the word fallout when we're talking about nuclear documents, but what is the fallout from your reporting? Have you heard about the intention of the DOJ as far as an appeal, as Neal has mentioned, or the consequences that are rippling across Washington, maybe around the world, the concerns that are being expressed about what might be out there and in there?
Well, you know, first off, I'd say that Neal's got a really good point because the DOJ sources, or I shouldn't say that group because it's broader than that, but like law enforcement sources, let's say, who are looking this through, are very worried about letting the executive privilege piece of this, the like halt a criminal investigation because Donald Trump thinks that some documents have executive privilege. A lot of Department of Justice and law enforcement sources are saying that just can't stand. But on the issue of the nuclear documents, it started, you know, the government has known this long before I reported it. They knew it, you know, on the evening of August 8th and the morning of August 9th when they began looking through these records. And they've known this for a good month now. The calculus that I keep hearing from sources is twofold. To bring a prosecution against a former president, two things have to hold. One, that the documents that he spirited away or helped spirit away or tried to conceal were of extraordinary sensitivity, not run-of-the-mill stuff, as you said so well before, not the Kim Jong-un love letters, you know, something serious. The second part of the calculus is overwhelming, compelling evidence of deception when the FBI and the National Archives, by my count, for 12 months, have ardently requested, pleaded, and begged, please, 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 with a cherry on top, as I refer to the National Archives letter that they wrote in January. All of these efforts were rebuffed and ultimately given misleading information by Trump's delegates, a lawyer and a custodian of the records. So compelling evidence of deception. And we don't know what the Department of Justice has on that score, but those two things are critical in deciding whether to cross the Rubicon and charge a former president, something that's never happened before. The reporting has also had the fallout of causing a series of ambassadors and ambassador apparatchiks to try to find out, was it their country? You know, they're trying to understand whose records were in there at Mar-a-Lago. And I've had a couple of people try to ask me politely off the record. And, you know, of course, what we learn, we put in the paper when we meet the standard for publication. And I promise that we will do that as soon as we can.
Neal, we've already seen, as Carol alluded to, again and again, the National Archives, the Justice Department has asked over and over, pretty please with a cherry on the top, for these documents and been assured by Donald Trump's lawyers that, nope, that's all we have. So already there's a sense that any possible means of getting this information back before things got hot and heavy had been done. And now the criticism of Judge Cannon is that in a nation where nobody is supposed to be above the law, that there's a carve-out exception being made for how Donald Trump is being treated, and that arguably anybody who has material searched in a possible criminal investigation can say, hey, I want a special master too. No, 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 that's my stuff. That's nobody else's stuff, and I am entitled to it. I know it's a kind of a reductio ad absurdum, but it does point to how the kid glove handling that's been going on for Donald Trump in this.
I love that point, Pat, because you're 100% right. Nobody gets special masters in these kinds of circumstances. And if you get them, like Michael Cohen did, it's for a really limited thing, surgically in, surgically out, not some kind of roving special master. And certainly you don't have an injunction from a federal judge to stop the criminal case. So that just doesn't happen. And as I say, that's why, I think the Justice Department has to appeal. I mean, having sat in the chair over whether to authorize Justice Department appeals, I don't think that there is any other option. They may be doing other things as well, but I think an appeal is part of it. But it's not just about taking of the materials. And as Carol's right, it's also about the deception involved afterwards. So it's not just he took the nuclear secrets from the White House, it's that he refused to give them back when he was subpoenaed to do so. And from the day the search warrant was issued, the million-dollar question has always been, Donald Trump, what in the world were you doing with these documents in the first place?
We're getting a lot of questions from our viewers about that.
Yeah, and he's on his social media thing, whatever it's called, all the time, like bashing the FBI, this and that. He's never explained it. His lawyers are on TV 24 hours a day. They've never explained it. They filed all these briefs in court. None of those briefs explain that. And so that's why I also think okay, fine, you can have a special master or not, you can have delay, but at the end of the day, the FBI's got the goods on him. And I think he's going to jail. Carol's right to say the level of deception is going to be important here. I don't disagree with that. But I'd also just add to that the level of deception we already know is quite strong, because he directed his attorneys to say, hey, I've turned over all the classified information, and that obviously was wrong. They found more than twice the amount of classified information during the search executing the warrant than that had been voluntarily turned over. So that's wrong. But then there's also, I think, the question of those attorneys who certified that, what are they going to do? They're facing massive criminal liability. And it was one thing, and this is where Donald Trump, I think, just got drunk on his own power. When he was president, he could dangle pardons for you, like Bannon and Roger Stone. He had all sorts of powers available to him. He could order the Justice Department not to prosecute. Who knows all the things that he did? I don't think it's all come out, but at least some of it has, in the notion of in the nature of the pardons and his dangling of pardons ahead of time, his screeds against rats, all that. That works okay if you're the president, if you're truly the mob boss and you've got all these tools at your disposal. Private citizen Donald Trump, for all of his delusions, doesn't have those tools available to him. So those attorneys are facing jail time, the loss of their license and the like. And it may not just be those attorneys. It could be any number of people around Trump's orbit who saw certain, observed certain things. And so I suspect that the deception case is going to get a lot stronger. This does not feel like, in the end, a hard criminal prosecution. Yes, it's going to test the country because we've never had a former president indicted before, but we've never had a former president commit these kind of crimes before either.
And yet you bring up a point, Neal, about how this will go forward. And I want to ask Carol, because we saw Lindsey Graham a week or two ago. Well, if anything happens, if Trump is indicted or arrested, you're going to see riots in the streets. And I wonder what you hear or sense about Merrick Garland's Justice Department, how it's weighing how to proceed on this. not only the question of an appeal, but is it ultimately, even though the protocol is that you don't indict a sitting president, he's no longer a sitting president. You have political considerations with the upcoming midterms and then the campaigns that ensue after that. So all of these are having to factor into what it seems like, according to Neal, pretty straight up, justice and prosecutable case. What are you hearing on that score?
I think when you asked that question, it triggered two strong memories for me of conversations with two very different universes of sources. First, I would describe a universe of sources that views themselves almost as delegated. That's not fair. As goodwill ambassadors and intermediaries for the Attorney General. They have long-standing relationships with him, and they may intuit what he normally would do. And some of them probably have some more direct interaction with him. And some of those people have said to me, Neal and I know a lot of them in common, but some of them have said to me, he's not going to be political about this, but he has to think over and over again. He has to hand wrestle with the notion that it will appear, even as fair as a charge may be, even as overwhelming the evidence may be for a charge, he has to hand wrestle with this notion that it will appear that one administration of a political party is punishing and criminalizing politics of the adverse party. That in essence, the Democrats went after the old Republican as soon as they got into office. That will weigh on this decision. The next universe of sources and the phone calls that I've had that your good question, Pat, made me think of were people who have formerly worked for Donald Trump and have said to me in the last 48 hours, as I was preparing this story, the level of government secrets, it's undeniable these are not his records. It's undeniable that he shouldn't have them. It's undeniable that he lied or he had somebody lie for him. And I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing those people. I'm not speaking for myself. And what they have said to me, and if I put them into a composite for you and the audience, is he is going to lose political goodwill on this one because it's untenable to say he should be able to have this in a place with weddings and beach towels.
And oh, Neal, you were going to say something? You're still on mute. I'm sorry. There we go.
Sorry, there are two things I wanted to just jump in on about Garland's choice. So one is the choice over whether to indict that Carol was talking about. The second is what's he going to do with respect to this special master decision. On the thing about whether to indict, I agree with Carol. This is a guy, Merrick Garland is like the most sober, non-political kind of lawyer in DC. He's been portrayed as something kind of insane by the Republican machinery. This is a guy who's our chief judge of our nation's second highest court for 20 years, never once overruled by the Supreme Court. Republicans used to love him, like Senator Hatch and so on. This is a not political guy, but more importantly, he's a not bloodthirsty guy. I don't think he wants to do this for 1 second. I mean, there are a lot of people who I think would. He's just not one. And the end of it, though, I think he's going to do what Carol said, which is evaluate, is this going to be seen as political? Do I actually have a strong case? And he's going to do the right thing, which is what does the rule of law require? And the rule of law doesn't countenance giving someone a pass just because they were a former president. And if you think about all the mishmash of arguments Trump has made, he couldn't be indicted when he was a president. They said sitting presidents can't be indicted. Now they're claiming past presidents can't be indicted. Then they're going to say you can't indict before an election. And then after the 22 election, they're going to say can't indict him after the election because he's running again in 2024. There are countries around the world that do operate that way, but like those are the ones like my parents fled. So I just don't see this as a realistic way of thinking about the rule of law. With respect to the question of what do you do about the special master, he's got three options. One, the most straightforward, is take an appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. That's a quite conservative court. 6 of the 11 judges appointed by Trump himself, others appointed by Republican presidents. And it's also a court that has some delay attached to it. And so you got to worry if you do that, how long is that going to bullocks things up? It might take a year. and then you'd have to go to Trump will try and delay it more by going to the Supreme Court. So you might be talking about a multi-year delay. Second option, go back to the judge in Florida and say, hey, we don't really understand your ruling. How do we not look at these documents? What does it mean to bar criminal investigative use of them? And can we narrow the scope of the documents so it's just, whatever you think is attorney-client privileged, just that. There is no claim to executive privilege here for 10 reasons, including the fact that the current president has waived it. So maybe you can get her to reconsider. They have a third option. This judge wrote a terrible opinion, so terrible that in footnote 16, she may have pled herself out of her own court because she said that she's granting such sweeping review to the special master that it's triggering the Presidential Records Act. And the Presidential Records Act, and it says only DC judges can oversee that, not anyone else. So the government might just be saying, we're going to file a motion to change venue, which means change the location, and now have a judge in DC review this. And I think there are about 20 district court federal trial judges in DC. Carol used to cover the DC bench. I remember there's not one of those 20 who would uphold what this special master did.
Well,
No.
there's so many.
And not for political reasons, for judge reasons, for understanding law school reasons.
Right. I mean, as I say, the Florida judge's opinion is a little more like food court than it is judicial court.
There's so many moving parts to this. There's some other issues we want to get to and to questions. So if you have questions as you're watching, put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to them. Ken wants to know, and this kind of raised itself in my mind, whether other Trump properties should be searched. Carol, do you have any indication that there are questions about some other places like Bedminster or his New York apartment, or even the copying machines at Mar-a-Lago?
Sure. I mean, I think that all of his properties, if they haven't already been the subject of subpoena, they seem like they'd be open season for it. I literally had a former Trump ally call me recently and say, why hasn't a subpoena been served at Bedminster? You should be looking into that. These are places where he traveled frequently. He takes records in a big valise from time to time. He has a certain body man as president, and he still has one as a former president. He travels with them and carries around this satchel. So I don't see why they shouldn't be looking elsewhere. There may be a reason, by the way, that Department of Justice and the FBI have steered themselves towards Mar-a-Lago. That has to do with those witness interviews that I wrote about that happened in April and May that led to this very sweeping, broad subpoena for Mar-a-Lago materials. There may be a very good investigative reason. I have a question for Neal, if you don't mind, on the issue, and I'll be brief, which is, I've heard some people who are of your ilk, Neal, who have said to me, they should just let the special master go forward and then get to the criminal investigation. Get this thing settled and move on and don't allow any delay. What's your view of that?
Yeah, I don't really see how that happens, at least under the current judge's order, because you've enjoined the investigation for an unknown amount of time. And whatever the special master decides, we don't have any guidance to the special master about what is privilege and what isn't. I mean, Supreme Court said if the incumbent president says nothing is governed by executive privilege, that goes a long way into saying there's no executive privilege. And the Supreme Court in the Nixon case also said if it's a criminal investigation involving wrongdoing of a president, then that will trump any executive privilege, supersede any executive privilege anyway. So there is no claim to executive privilege. And, the Supreme Court just earlier this year in an 8-1 decision rejected former President Trump's, bogus attempts to try and keep asserting it. But that doesn't mean that that won't be litigated for a long time. So as a result, I think they should go back to the special master first and ask for clarification and try and narrow it. I do think any appeal will take time, but I also think the special master maneuver may take some time. And maybe the cleanest thing for the department to do, if they can't get the judge to back down and they don't move venue to Washington, D.C., is to ask for a really quick legal ruling by the Court of Appeals and then ultimately probably the U.S. Supreme Court that Trump's got no claim to a special master.
It's-
Neal,
Sorry, the odds of judges backing down in my experience is pretty much zero, but continue.
Neal, one of our hosts, Janice Kaminer-Resnick, suggested, not entirely jokingly, that maybe the only qualified special master is Barack Obama because he has had access to these documents before. But in a larger question, Neal, is the consequences now for the Justice Department and the FBI. When you see Senator Ted Cruz saying there need to be wholesale firings at the FBI, when you see Marco Rubio, you've got a Fox host saying, geez, nuclear documents, should they really have been at Mar-a-Lago? And Senator Marco Rubio of Florida saying, well, look who your source is, the DOJ and the FBI. There's more damage than just to immediate national security that this is creating.
Yeah, I mean, those are garbage claims. I mean, and those people, I mean, frankly, don't deserve to wear the titles that they do when they insult people like that. I mean, who runs the FBI? A guy named Chris Wray. Who appointed Chris Wray? President Trump. I mean, like, this is just such nonsense. These people will say and do anything to keep their guy in power. And it's, you know, so disheartening to me as an American, because, like, you know, I've always just thought there's stuff that has to be about party politics, but not for these people. So it's despicable. And the point you made about Barack Obama, you said it in jest, or the questioner said in jest, there's actually a really difficult point here, which is who's actually going to have the security clearances to serve as special master? Almost no one. As Carol's reporting says, this is material that, like, cabinet officials have access to and almost no one else. So that universe of people is going to be small, and it's going to be even smaller still because, you know, it's very hard to imagine an agreement between the Justice Department and Donald Trump over who will serve as special master. Mm-hmm. So, so you've got all those problems. I mean, it's also thoroughly inconsistent with Trump's whole claim, which was he had a standing order to declassify the documents, because if they're declassified, then you don't need this. I mean, that's, of course, inconsistent with his prior claim that the documents were planted by the FBI. But regardless, I mean, it's hard to keep track of all the different stories here. But nonetheless, I think a special master is unfortunately going to take a lot of time, which is, of course, what Trump's playbook has been.
Jack asked Carol, and I will put the question to you. We have the case in New Mexico where an elected politician was barred from further public office and his present office because he participated in the insurrection. Is that even down the road a possibility with Donald Trump, or is that too fraught with political consequences?
Was that to me?
Well, maybe, I don't know if Carol would like to speak to it first.
I'm keen to hear what Neal has to say, but I will say that it's four innings ahead from my perspective to make any speculative claims about that. I mean, yes, there's been a lot of work on the part of different investigators and also activists to say, let's hold people responsible for their role in an insurrection. But, you know, for the longest time as a reporter, I thought that Donald Trump was facing very serious legal liability for a couple of elements of his role in January 6th, conspiracy to defraud the US government, his efforts, despite being warned a million times that what he was saying was dangerous, what he was doing was illegal. He continued to spread this information. I thought that's where his real legal jeopardy lay until we began learning the behind the scenes of this, you know, straight up criminal case, potential obstruction, concealment, willful retention of these enormously sensitive documents. And even I had to be double convinced how serious that was, and by his own advisors saying to me, you know, in June, we began to believe that this is where his greatest vulnerability lies, and it is completely self-inflicted. Again, I'm paraphrasing them. So I think it's too far for us to start talking about holding Donald Trump away from the 2024 nomination process when we're still in the muck of two incredibly complex criminal investigations.
Sure. And Neal on this point.
Yeah, so like I said, it's really hard to keep track of Donald Trump's lies and stories, but it's also really hard to keep track of all the criminal investigations he's facing. So there are four of them. One is the Mar-a-Lago stolen classified documents one. We've been talking about that for most of the hour. The second is his role in January 6th as an insurrectionist and potential crimes there. The third is an investigation by New York State into his tax practices over real estate, inflation, and the like. His CFO recently pled guilty to that. And the fourth is a state investigation in Georgia into things like Find Me 11,780 votes. And your question goes to the second bucket about January 6th. And, I start there because, yes, there is this tool. It's been around since Reconstruction. So for 150 years, has been used up until this court recently, I think yesterday. But, if you think Trump is an insurrectionist, there's just much more straightforward stuff. Carol mentioned a conspiracy charge, but there's also an obstruction of an official proceeding charge, the official proceeding being the count on January 6th. We know that the committee, the congressional committee, has been looking into that. Liz Cheney's already said she thinks he's guilty. More of these crimes, more importantly, a federal judge, very respected judge in California, Judge Carter, has said it is more likely than not that Donald Trump committed these crimes related to the January 6th insurrection. So I don't think yesterday's decision changes the calculus much. Either the department is going to reach the judgment that Trump violated these statutes or did not.
We have those other two cases you mentioned, the state of New York and the state of Georgia. If looking at this as a horse race, which horse is out ahead of these four, at least four in the running?
We don't know. I mean, these are criminal cases. There's a bunch of reports that the New York case against Trump has been stopped. It looks like the new DA at least hit the pause, leading some of his prosecutors to resign. It may be that it's ongoing. That recent plea by the CFO is worded in a really weird way. It might be that CFO will provide testimony against Donald Trump, so we'll have to see. The Georgia investigation, as I understand, there's a grand jury impaneled there that's looking at evidence now.
Carol, what impact, as one of our viewers has asked, Susan, how is this going to impact the midterms? Is there any way of assessing? They're a couple of months away, and a couple of months, as we've seen, is an eternity.
I'm not a political reporter. I sit next to a lot of them at the Washington Post, and I'm friends with them. What I hear them revealing and sharing in our news meetings is that what had once been a foregone conclusion that Republicans would take the House is now not so foregone, and that Donald Trump may actually have been the drag that changed those odds slightly. There's also the issue of the Senate. It's also looking increasingly unlikely that that's going to switch. And again, Donald Trump is listed as the person to blame in many of the, although he's not the only one. Rick Scott also is being blamed to a degree for wasting millions of dollars and trying to toady up to Trump rather than really spend a lot of money getting some of these Republican politicians elected. So the midterms have changed quite a bit in the course of 6 to 8 months. At least the prognostication has changed a great deal.
Sid wants to know, Carol, of course, without revealing your sources, why so many of these former Trump advisors and inner circle people are willing to distance themselves to you, at least privately, and will they do so publicly at some point?
I think the best way to answer that question is the experience that I've had covering Donald Trump since 2016, which as each month and year goes by, people who had been in his circle find that loyalty is a one-way street with him. You will do everything you possibly can for him, and he will pat you on the head, and then he will shock and dismay and make you recoil at what he's willing to do to hold on to power. And I've had I guess you could say the privilege, it's been sad at times, but I've had the privilege in this moment in history to meet a lot of the people as they go through this cathartic experience of realizing that Donald Trump has crossed even a line for them, despite supporting his ideology, despite their desire to support his presidency, even despite their great joy at the judges that he was able to install on federal benches across the land. Even all of those things notwithstanding, they've been disgusted by some of his decisions. among them, the icing on the cake, sorry to use so much pastry metaphor, but the icing on the cake has really been holding on to these incredibly closely held secrets that, national security officials, no matter their politics, respect and honor and care about our government being safe and our US gathering methods, intel methods being protected, and our human sources being protected. Neal brought up that issue of like the possibility of risk to US intel sources, human sources. When Donald Trump made that head-blowing revelation to two very senior Russian officials in the Oval Office, he revealed most likely our source for this information about a national government, another government's defense. In doing so, the US government gathered together rapidly. Again, Trump administration, US government officials gathered to discuss whether they should pull a host of people out of the field. And they did very soon after pull a US source, a covert source out of Russia, not because that person was connected to the information that Donald Trump so callously shared with an adversary, but because they feared that person would be killed if any other information was exposed as haphazardly as Trump had done in the Oval Office.
So the things that happen in spy novels can also happen, can happen in real life as well. We only have a couple of minutes and we like to end on a bit of a higher note if we can, something optimistic, something to look forward to. So if you can take a minute or so, Neal Katyal, and give us your assessment.
Well, I am optimistic about the rule of law because I feel like it's coming back. And yes, it's had a big setback this week with this judge's ruling, but it's only a temporary setback. And at the end of the day, this criminal case is shaping up very strongly, and every day makes the case stronger. So just the trajectory and momentum of the case has a very powerful feel to it. And Trump has always gotten away with stuff because people in power have flinched. I don't know if they flinched because they, get taken by him and get under his spell, or because they get scared, or for health reasons or whatever. I don't know. But this right now doesn't have the trajectory of a flinch. You've got the first search of a former president's premises ever in our history. You've got a grand jury investigation that's active against him, and you have every day new and new revelations about what he took and how serious it is, and most importantly, zero explanation by him over what in the world he was doing with all of this, or an explanation of how he could have possibly been justified in thumbing his nose, not just at the archivist, but at the grand jury in the form of that subpoena. So I think he's going to jail. That's, so that may be optimistic and maybe heart-wrenching. It's probably both in a way, but I think that's what's happening.
And Carol Leonnig, we know that historians have warned President Biden that we are at a critical juncture in democracy. What do you see as the light at the end of that tunnel?
I second some of the things Neal said about the rule of law, but I would add one more, and that is Bill Barr. I'm sure there will be a lot of people in your audience cursing me, but I think Bill Barr coming forward on Fox News is a harbinger of something. He chose very specifically to go on an airwave that normally pronounces everything Donald Trump does as rosy and perfect. And he chose that venue to say, this is nuts. Nobody should have these records, not even my former boss, the man that I hoped would get reelected, and then I worked to help get reelected. This to me signals the sort of prow of the boat of a return to people rallying around fact and reality, Republicans and Democrats. I have been very worried about our country because of the rejection of fact. And when I see some of these larger profile people, Bill Barr public, and then now more coming to me privately, but I think they will become public soon, saying this is a bridge too far. we have to do something about a person who makes these phony claims and doesn't treat our national security with the proper respect and kid gloves that it deserves. That to me signals something positive about rallying around facts.
Carol Leonnig and Neal Katyal, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm sure you'll be back again. Thank you both for being here. Thank you all for watching. Next week, I will be joined by Cecile Richards, the former head of Planned Parenthood, about the consequences of the Dobbs ruling from the Supreme Court and the fallout that we may see from that on the midterm elections. I want to thank you all for joining us and thank you for supporting these programs here. You see some information on your screen. That's how you do it. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks again.